and welcome to Call for Salt. Today I want to be discussing the difference between social justice and righteous justice. As evangelical Christians, our final authority, our source that we go to for truth is the Word of God, is the Bible. And so I'm going to be digging into the Bible to see what the Bible says about justice. And I think we're going to find, I think you'll see that the Bible references and puts justice in the terms of righteousness. Is justice being based upon what is right, again, over against what is wrong. So true justice is what we want to find and we want to discover today. Social justice, we're going to find, is something very different. Many of you may have a basic understanding of social justice, and we're going to get into some of the details of what that is. Now, I want to preface, before we get into the Word of God, I want to preface everything I'm about to say with this statement. And I want to let you know that I feel your pain if you're a conservative today. Because the great irony of the last few years is that justice has been turned on its head. The real victims of justice are actually the ones that are named as the perpetrators. And I look at social justice as something that is being used as a bludgeoning tool, oftentimes, as part of the left's toolkit to demonize those that are on the right, those that are conservative, those that are not racist at all, or not, xenophobic or misogynist, or any of those new terms they want to make up for to make themselves sound more intelligent. Any of those things, most conservatives have nothing to do with those. But conservatives are the ones that are actually the ones that are being the victims in society. And we're not crying and whining about this all the time. We're not the ones that have the media blasting, our truth out there. But nevertheless, it is a system that is completely, is a double standard in the system. There's a double standard in society. The media is a huge part of it. If you're a conservative, you're demonized. You're marginalized. You're targeted. You're canceled. Many conservatives, and even people that aren't even political, by making a common sense statement, have lost their jobs, lost their reputations, have been sued. Conservatives have been arrested for nothing. Oftentimes, so that this is a double standard. But if you're on the left, you're dubbed as the victim. You're lauded as someone who is an oppressed group, and whether you've done anything wrong or not, you're defended. If you've done something wrong, you're usually defended by the media. The media is, just basically another extension of the Democrat Party. They are an arm of the Democrat Party, and the mainstream media can control the conversation. And it's very, very, very frustrating. And I feel that pain. I'm one of those conservatives that have, our message isn't popular. Our message is conservatism is about compassion at the end of the day. It's what's best for everybody. But it is, and Christianity, biblical Christianity but that's not what we hear in the media. Some of these examples of injustice, this double standard. The presidency that we had, the last president that we had before Biden. I'm not going to say his name. I think we all know who the president was, who was a one-term president, but almost in his entire term, the media just trumpeted this false narrative of a Russia collusion, which was actually a Russia collusion hoax. It was based on fabricated evidence by the Democrat Party and Hillary Clinton and certain individuals, high-up individuals in the FBI, to try to bring down a sitting president. It was all found to be completely, there was no there. There was nothing to it. But it was fabricated by his political enemies who wanted him out. If the Republicans hadn't controlled the Senate, he would have been removed from office. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He was impeached by the Democrats in the House for that. He was also impeached by them for the Ukraine situation, which was another double standard. which was another no there. An anonymous source, remember, came up with this and stated all these statements about him, that he was committing a quid pro quo with the Ukrainian government, and all of that. Found out the call that he was on was just, it was not a quid pro quo. It was completely fine, and yet we had recordings of Biden having a quid pro quo when he was in office in the Obama administration. Before that, his son was on this board getting paid tons of money in an oil company, and he basically said, if you don't fire him, if you don't fire this guy that's investigating my son's corruption, basically, we're not going to give you this $1 billion in aid. And quid pro quo. And he was bragging, and President Biden back then, Vice President Biden back then, was bragging about it. It's just whatever the left does, they can get away with just about anything. But the right is they're just completely, they're just completely attacked and completely demonized in the press. And so it is a double standard. You look at Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, this was a simple case of self-defense, very cut and dried. Once all the evidence was laid out there. But we have a media that the narrative was that he was a white supremacist, he was a racist, he was ties to white supremacist groups, all of the whole mantra, and he actually was not even really a political person. If you look at his interviews afterwards, he didn't want to be part of all this. He just wanted to go there and help protect some friends that their businesses were being burned down. He wasn't pointing guns and threatening people. He was there to mostly help people with their medical issues. So at the end of they almost destroyed an entire guy's life. He almost went to prison for the rest of his life based on lies that a media just ginned up in culture. And you got people saying all kinds of crazy things about him. So that's injustice. That's true injustice. Thankfully, our justice justice system, our jury, we still have juries. We still have judges that are fair, and not always, but oftentimes they are. And they follow the laws that we still have on the books that are still, for the most part, just. And so, therefore, on the local level, he was able to be found not guilty. But if they listened to the media, if they gave in to media pressure, the guy would have been in prison for life. Just absolutely unfair. And then a third example would just be the countless individuals like you and me, individuals that have been canceled or ridiculed, or because of the stands that we take on principles that we believe, and called haters, bigots, you name it. I mean, I've experienced hardly any of it compared to many people who have been canceled, lost jobs, been, just completely vilified and lost their reputations. So, yeah, there is a double standard. And that's the major injustice. That's one of the major injustices that's happening in this country. Not to mention the millions of babies that are aborted, and we can go on and on about what the true injustices are. But I want to get into the one verse first that just really encapsulates what true biblical justice is all about, and that is in Amos. And I'm going to go to my Bible Gateway here, and I'm going to read it here. Amos chapter 5, verse 24. The irony is that this is the same passage that David Platt, famous Big Eva pastor, spoke on at the T4G conference in 2018. And this was a controversial sermon that he gave, because basically he used this to basically place guilt on white evangelicals for basically being implicitly racist, and not being sensitive to the social justice issues and critical race theory. It was coming out in his sermon, and he used this passage. He took it out of context and used it to defend, basically to elevate social justice. But this is what it said. The verse 24 was the verse that was kind of his theme verse, and here's the verse. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. You see, justice and righteousness are kind of tied together here. Justice and righteousness are mentioned together over and over and over. Psalm 89 would be one. Justice and righteousness are the foundation of your throne. Over and over and over again, you see that justice is tied to the righteous standards and the righteousness of God, his moral righteousness, of his standards of what are right and wrong. And what is right is what justice upholds, is upholding, is what meant to uphold, against what is wrong. And what's morally right versus what is morally wrong. So that's a very basic understanding of biblical justice. We're going to get into a few examples of some characteristics of that. But before we do, I want to discuss social justice just very briefly. Social justice, what are some characteristics of social justice? There's a lot that can be said here, but one characteristic is that it's a redistribution. Excuse me. It believes in the redistribution of wealth and power from oppressor groups, those that, like, for example, majority groups, they might call it that, or those white privilege, or those would be whites, to oppressed groups. Those would be groups like African Americans, is a big one, LGBT, women with the Me Too movement. It's not just wealth. It's not just old school Marxism with an economic focus, but it's new school Marxism, which is like kind of a critical theory, which is basically more of a social Marxism, which is not just dealing with economics, but it's dealing with classes. Not just not economic classes. It's dealing with any oppressed class, a social Marxism. So we have power that needs to be transferred as well, and they believe that this power and this power structure, this power oppression is embedded into society, and it needs to be, these wrongs need to be righted, and so that all groups of people are quote unquote equal, and it's nothing more than really just as a socialist outcome, as a socialist goal, to make this country a socialist state. And really the purpose of bringing it a socialist state is so the government elites can consolidate power to control our lives, control our individual rights, and so that they can be in control. If they can create multiple classes of individuals that think that they are oppressed and they're victims, and the government is there to save them, they can always depend on their votes, and they can always remain in power. If they can demonize everybody else, if they can demonize the quote-unquote majority culture, they're actually not the majority, because if you add up all the minorities and the people that feel bad that they're white privilege or they have white guilt, they'll vote for the Democrat Party, and they'll keep these people in power, and they'll have complete control. And really everyone suffers in the end but the elites. The elites, the rules don't apply to them. And why does everyone suffer if all these power structures are changing? Well, everyone suffers is because socialism brings nothing but lack of incentive, lack of personal responsibility. No one wants to work harder than anyone else. I mean, why would you? If you're getting the same outcome, you're getting the same benefits as everyone else, why would you? So businesses close, people lose jobs. This wealth, quote unquote, these wealthy are actually building businesses and building jobs and growing the economy. It's actually hurting because they're leaving. They're not working hard. They're not building the businesses because why would you? You have no incentive when you have to give it all away, or most of it away, to be equal. When you're demonized, so it creates, chaos. It creates a breakdown of society, and not only that, it divides. It divides, and that's one reason why it creates chaos, because it divides between groups. If you're in one class, you're automatically wrong whether you did anything wrong, because you're part of the majority class. If you're in the oppressed class, then you're automatically okay if you do something wrong. You're actually automatically defended, because you automatically have a leg up to getting away with doing whatever you want to do, because you are automatically an oppressed person. We saw this with the Kavanaugh situation, with the Me Too movement, was hailing Kavanaugh's accuser with she had unsubstantiated allegations from 30 some years ago. And she, the people, the witnesses she claimed knew about it, didn't even remember and testified to that fact. Didn't even remember that these things happened. She was the only one that remembered, quote unquote, remembered these things. But she was believed by so many. What we're supposed to just believe. We're supposed to just believe her. She has an automatic up on this poor guy. What they did to him and his family was absolutely, but he is a white male, and so therefore he has privilege, so therefore he has too much power, therefore we need to not believe him as much and be more willing to believe his accuser. And that just goes against every bit of system of justice that we have in America from the founding of this country. And it is absolutely not biblical justice. It is based on emotion, it's based on political ideology, and it is absolutely wrong. So this is social justice. These are characteristics, and really it's more about feeling than fact. That's the last thing I want to point out. There's a lot more to it, but social justice, but it's really about feelings more than facts. It's the media can gin up, they can take anecdotal stories, and they can gin up anger and frustration in society, and they can gin up division based on a story that they can spin any way they want. For example, George Floyd, it was a tragedy. There was a bad apple police officer who did perpetrate police brutality against and killed somebody, killed a black man who was a criminal, but he killed him, and completely horrible. But it was not. There was no evidence that it was racist. But because it was a white cop and a black person that was killed, it was just automatically deemed as racist and police brutality against the black community, and that was the narrative. That was the narrative. But that is absolutely again not what it was all about. That's not what was happening in this country. There is no major problem with police brutality at all. It's not directed at any particular community. The facts actually spoke to the fact that the cops are not responding to. They're not responding in. Usually, when a cop has to shoot or bring deadly force against a criminal, he's not responding based on race. He's responding based on violence, the level of violence. Because when we look at the actual statistics, we'll see that. The statistics actually show, aside from feeling, aside from anecdotal stories, the statistics actually show in 2019, the year before this whole thing happened with George Floyd, that of the unarmed police shootings of unarmed individuals where there were fatalities, there were 15 people that were killed that were African American, and there were 25 that were killed that were white. Now you say, well, there's only black Americans. They're only 13% of the population, so they should be far fewer than the whites proportionately. Well, that's not the number to look at. The number to look at is who is actually committing the violent crimes. And when the police are running into these situations where they feel they have to use deadly force, they're running into violent criminal situations. And the statistics, and all these statistics come from the Washington Post database, hardly a paragon of conservatism. But the overall violent crime, non-lethal violent crime, overall is 36 to 30. It was between 36 and 38%, depending on the statistic. Depending on the site that was quoting Washington Post, between 36 and 38% of all violent crime is perpetrated by African Americans, and they're only 13% of the population. And 53%, this is back in 2018, these are the latest numbers for these statistics. Back in 2018, 53% of all homicides were committed by African Americans. And that's not to denigrate a whole ethnic group, or, it's not, the purpose is not to stereotype. These are just statistics. These are the facts. So when police are running into dangerous situations, they're typically running into African Americans. So they're gonna be, typically you would think there'd be a higher percentage even than that, even more than 15 people killed in 1 year. Now that's horrible that had to happen, but 25 whites were killed and only 15 blacks, when they are 53% of homicides. It's not there's no targeting of black people within the police communities. There's bad apples, and I'm sure there's racists here and there, like there is anywhere. And we need to, if we can prove it that it's racist, we need to treat it that way. We need to broadcast it on the media that way. But if it's not, and just because the ethnicities of the individuals happen to be a certain thing, if there's no evidence of racism, that should not come into the picture at all. It's just absolutely used to divide us. If you're African American today, I love you. If you're African American today, I'm sure you feel bad about these things. But it's used to divide us. It's not used to bring us together. It's used to make us racist against each other when there's no need to be racist against each other, because we're all one blood. We all are created, come from Adam, and we are loved and created in the image of God, just as valuable to God. So don't fall for it. If you are a person that is starting to be led along by emotion. But what do we see? We saw in the evangelical world, we saw a lot of our friends, a lot of our Christian friends, jumping on this social justice bandwagon, this Black Lives Matter bandwagon. Police brutality is a major problem in this country, and racism is far more widespread than we would like to believe, and us whites are blind to this, and we have white privilege, and we need to recognize our white guilt, and just all of these narratives that were coming out of this. It's just, that's not justice. I mean, that's not justice when those things, that's not injustice. That is not injustice towards a group, an oppressed group versus an oppressor. That's not what it's all about in this situation. That would just be one example of how the media and the left tries to frame this. So with that being said, that's kind of an idea of social justice. Social justice is trying to bring equal outcomes by dividing groups of oppressors and oppressed, and bringing chaos to society is really what it does. And bringing only power and wealth and actual true flourishing to the elites in government. And its oppression of the people by the government is really what it comes down to. It's communism. It ends in communism. But what's the difference? How does the Bible talk about justice? Well, what is true justice? True justice is based on righteousness, as we talked about in Amos. But look at Romans. I want to turn to Romans chapter 2. And I believe it's verse 12. I'm going to turn there real quick, or I'm going to scroll there real quick on my Bible Gateway. Romans 2. And I believe it's verse 12. It says, "For as many as have sinned without law will also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these although not having the law are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts, accusing or else excusing them." In verse 16, "In the day when God will judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel." So God's going to judge with perfect justice. And his justice is going to be based on whether people are based on his moral laws. And his moral laws are not just written in the Ten Commandments and in the Bible, the Word of God, the Bible. It's not just his printed word. It is also written in the law. His law is written in every human heart. So even those that don't know God, have not heard the gospel, have not heard the Word of God, have not heard the Ten Commandments, they have the moral, through their conscience, they know what is right and wrong. Now that can be twisted, and that can be that can be seared. Their conscience can be seared, but generally they have an understanding of what is right and wrong, and they will be judged by that. It's about God's righteous standards. God's righteous standards. So righteous justice upholds God's moral law. Righteous justice actually upholds God's moral law. That's one characteristic. Another characteristic is that it does not show partiality. Proverbs 18:5 is one verse quickly that I want to show you. Proverbs 18:5. And that says, it is not good to show partiality to the wicked. Don't let the wicked get away with doing evil things, or to overthrow the righteous in judgment. In other words, and don't wrongly convict people that are innocent. We're seeing that in our society. They're trying at their best. The left is trying their best to convict the innocent and let off the guilty. And that one of the squad members of the progressive left was talking about wanting to empty all the prisons. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous. Now that's far left. Not all Democrats would be on board with that, but that's the way it's going. That's the way a lot of them, in practice, that's what a lot of them are doing on individual levels. Just absolutely ridiculous. But true justice does not show partiality. Biblical justice does not show partiality. Leviticus 19:5. This is very, very, very relevant for our time, and it's actually kind of surprised me when I saw it because it's very pointed. I'm sorry, Leviticus 19:15. Leviticus 19:15 says, "You shall do no injustice in judgment." Okay, when you judge, be just. Very basic. You shall not be partial to the poor. That's what we're seeing right now. The poor classes, the ones that are quote unquote poor and oppressed, even though our poor are richer than many of the middle class in many countries around the world, or even some of the richer people. They're some of the richest poor people you've ever seen because of our welfare programs, which some of them may be necessary. But what we're talking about today is absolutely unnecessary. So you should not be partial to the poor. In other words, don't take all these, don't take from people, don't steal from people to give to them and to keep them in without them working. If you don't work, you shouldn't eat, as the New Testament says. So you should not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. So no extra honor to someone just because they're mighty. No extra partiality because they're poor. And then it says, in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. In righteousness. There it is again. In righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. Not in disparities. Not in statistical disparities of outcomes of where their outcome is. But in righteousness. What is right and wrong? What is morally right and wrong? Are they being oppressed? Are the poor being oppressed? We need to write that. Are they truly being oppressed? Are they being oppressed under the law? Are the laws not being applied fairly to them? Then we need to. But our laws are, for the most part, our laws are fair, are being applied fairly. It doesn't happen all the time. There's individuals, but it's not like it's. There's other issues that are causing disparities, and it's not the laws. The laws were changed back in the civil rights era and after, and there's no racism, systemic racism in the laws of this country. So we have that, and then we have so that's a huge verse. And then so we have the characteristics that the characteristics of righteous judgment are that it upholds the moral law of God, and that there's no partiality in it. Also, its purpose in government is to punish and protect. Its purpose in government is not to redistribute. It's not to give reparations. It's not to make all classes equal outcomes and to correct disparities in between groups. None of that. It's about punishing those who would victimize the innocent. It's about protecting those who would be the victims. So look at Romans chapter 13. Romans 13. And it says this. Verse 1, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Now, I'll comment on this in just a second. Do you want to be, it goes on to say, do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise of the same, for he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. So here we are. It's specifically speaking about the purpose of government is for our good, to execute justice on those who would victimize others, those who are evil, those who need to have the sword be placed upon them, if you will, the sword of the government. Those who would practice evil, and when those that practice evil, they're always taking advantage of other people unlawfully. And so therefore a good government was, the purpose of government was for it to be good and to protect the innocent by executing judgment on those who are evil. That is not what social justice is speaking about at all. Not at all. There's a whole other conversation here as well about what if these rulers are not doing these things? Are we still supposed to submit? There's a number of factors that come into play. Is America still under Rome? No, we're not under Rome. We're under a constitutional form of government where the people are the ultimate. Our representatives are accountable to the actual people, and the representatives that are sworn to uphold the law are not upholding the law. They are not rulers that are rightful rulers. So when they're going out operating outside the Constitution, they are therefore now no longer representatives of government. They are no longer rulers. That's an argument that I would make. The Constitution and the people are the ultimate government. They are the government, and that's what we go by in America. So it is a little different here, but the principles still apply. The purpose of government was to be good, to protect his people, to execute justice and judgment on evildoers that are perpetrating evil on innocent people. So we protect ourselves against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That should be ultimately the only real role of the government. Protect the people from all enemies, foreign and domestic, according to the Bible. So that's the purpose. That's a characteristic of righteous judgment, and according to the Bible, is the government's role of doing just that, executing justice. So these are some areas of justice versus social justice. Social justice is all about groups of people. Individuals are not held accountable justly according to the Bible. It's not according to righteous standards for individuals. It does not recognize that each person is created in the image of God and they're valuable, and therefore anyone that does injustice on an individual, they need to pay for that crime. No, it goes back. It judges a person based on the group that they're in. That's completely foreign to the Bible. Biblical justice judges individuals based on their personal responsibility, based on the law of God. Are they accountable to the moral law of God? And are they committing evil? Then they need to be punished. Are they victims of evil? Then justice needs to be served for them by punishing the evildoers. And retribution needs to happen as much as possible for those evildoers to provide restitution to the victims that they've actually hurt. So that is a brief my brief summary of this. Well, I can get into individual aspects of this later on. I look forward to it. But again, I pray that that you're encouraged by this, because there are people out there that, just like you and me, that see the complete injustice, and it's being exposed more and more. And that's one of the things I'm doing, is showing, we cannot be let this social justice, it's subtle, it sounds good. They know how to frame it in a way that sounds like it's like this false humility, like, oh, well, we need to be just people, we need to recognize our wrongs, and we need to, blah, blah, blah. But it's actually dividing. It's actually dividing the church. It's actually creating a system that is unjust rather than just, and we're ignoring the actual injustices that are happening. And we need to deal with those. What are some of the major injustices in this society? Abortion. Abortion are the fatherless. They've been abandoned by their mother and father, and they've been consigned to death, and they're being murdered by the thousands and the millions. Over 60 million dead from abortion. That is an injustice. Those are innocent individual people that are created in the image of God. That's an injustice that we need to stop. That's a true injustice. Those are not just a group of people. Those are every individual is actually killed. Injustice is happening upon them. There's other, the slave, child trafficking. That's an injustice. Now, that's not legal, obviously, but we need to stiffen up our laws and do all that we can to fight that injustice in this country. There's many instances of injustice that we can deal with and we can stand up to and protect those that are innocent. But let's not fall for the political, the social Marxism that is meant to divide us. I pray that this has encouraged you, but I also pray that I believe that this may have challenged you to look at this a little deeper and to go to the Word of God and see that it's very, very, very different than what the message the world is trying to send on. Thank you very much, and until next time, you'll see me next time, and God bless.